Howdy folks, Chris Bianco here, part of your worldwide enablement team for IBM, and I'm one of two authors on this Level 3 course. Myself and Andy Jones have crafted together for you a Level 3 series on IBM Power Systems Virtual Server, which includes both a business partner and an IBM seller track. So we're going to go through the requirements of what you're going to do as part of this learning. You'll be joined by Andy in other videos and myself as part of introductions to the various modules that we'll be learning throughout this material. The learning material is broken up into distinct chapters, and to complete the Level 3 badge requirements, IBM and business partners and sellers need to complete parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 8 of this demonstration guide. IBM technical sellers and business partners who are also technical sellers need to complete all sections. However, both Andy and I recommend and encourage everyone to take all the sections if they have time, as there's a great value in going through the material. All modules are accompanied by recordings such as this one, developed and delivered by your team of authors. Be sure to watch these for a demonstration visually in terms of how to perform the hands-on lab components. And in particular, if you're an IBM seller or a technical seller, it's important to watch these recordings as they'll be key in developing and creating your own stand-in deliver recording, which is required for accreditation as part of this Level 3 material. It's important to note that in order to receive your Level 3 accreditation, IBMers and partners need to demonstrate mastery of the skills that they learn throughout the various modules of these hands-on labs and coursework. Level 3 accreditation requirements and the way that you as a participant will be evaluated before receiving your accreditation differs depending on your job role. If you fall into the category of one of our business partners, you must pass an accreditation quiz by completing the hands-on components of the course and then receiving a quiz at the end of your coursework, which will consist of multiple choice questions with 4 possible responses and only 1 correct answer. There are prompts throughout the lab in terms of what you should record and look out for so that you can save time and not have to repeat components of the lab before jumping in and being accredited on that quiz. IBM sales and tech sellers must develop a stand and deliver recording and a presentation. This is a video which is intended to simulate your delivery of a live demo, such as this, in front of a client on camera. IBMers will have the flexibility to define their type of hypothetical client, the pain points that that customer has, and the goals that they ultimately aspire to. The recording will then cover the seller's hands-on demonstration and their pitch to the client of the value of the IBM solution using the environments and the techniques that you'll cover throughout this lab work. Specific criteria that must be demonstrated as part of the stand and deliver recordings is provided within the documentation that accompanies this hands-on learning. IBM Power Systems Virtual Server, or Power VS, delivers flexible compute capacity for power system workloads worldwide. Integrated with the IBM Cloud Platform for on-demand provisioning, this offering provides a secure and scalable server virtualization environment built upon advanced RAS features and leading performance of the Power Systems platform. You should be familiar with Power VS already and should have completed the IBM Power Systems Virtual Server Sales Foundation Badge Level 2 course before embarking on this Level 3 content. The content here is not a replacement for the Level 1 and the Level 2 content that is part of the previous learning paths and modules, which are linked in the documentation that accompany this course if you want to go back and review them. There are links provided here for IBM sellers, IBM technical sellers, and our business partners. This demonstration environment has multiple purposes. First, it's meant to educate you on the IBM Power Systems Virtual Server and to hone your skills to perform Power VS demonstrations yourself. Additionally, the IBM Technology Zone, or Tech Zone as we'll often refer to it, provides us an environment and a demonstration guide associated with that for click-through demos and videos which could be reused and repurposed for your own client demonstrations. Primarily, our goal is to focus on the infrastructure as a service capability of Power VS and not so much on the operating systems that are supported by the offering. So we're not going to spend too much time on things like AIX, IBM I, or Linux. However, throughout the course of this learning material, you'll cover a number of different topics, In parts 1, 2, and 3, you'll learn how to demonstrate the environment and how it was built, and how to perform a baking show style demonstration using IBM Cloud Portal, click-through demonstrations, and videos. New Power VS resources are not provisioned as part of those modules. All the resources are pre-provisioned in a shared environment to save on time and money, and the click-through demos are done purely through a web browser. In part 4, you'll learn how to use IBM Cloud Portal to manage your Power VS instances. In part 5, you'll learn how to access the pre-provisioned Power VS instances using the IBM Cloud Shell programmatically. In parts 6 and 7, we introduce more technical aspects of the IBM Power VS environment, including how to use the CLI or the command line interface via the IBM Cloud Shell. And finally, in part 8, we learn where to find additional resources about IBM Power VS and how to complete your stand and deliver badge requirements for IBM sellers and your certification quiz for our business partners. By the time you've enrolled in this Level 3 course, you'll already know that Power Systems virtual servers are located across IBM data centers, distinct from the IBM Cloud servers with separate networks and direct attached storage. These environments operate in their own pod, and the internal networks are fenced off from one another. However, they still offer connectivity options to meet customer requirements where they live, including access even to the public internet should that be required. This carefully calibrated infrastructure enables Power Systems Virtual Server to maintain key enterprise software certification and support that customers that would receive with an on-premises infrastructure, but with the added flexibility and the new capabilities that come from working in an IBM Cloud deployment. With the environment provided to you for this Level 3 course via the IBM Technology Zone, we'll explore in detail how to go about configuring your infrastructure to work with private and public endpoints. With the Power Systems Virtual Server services, you can quickly create and deploy one or more virtual servers that are running either something like AIX, IBM I, or Linux operating systems. And after you provision the Power Systems Virtual Server, you get access to the infrastructure and the physical computing resources without needing to manage or operate them directly yourself. However, you must manage the operating systems that run on top of that infrastructure and the software applications and the data that also live above the infrastructure layer. Given that this course is primarily a demonstration of the infrastructure as a service components of Power VS, we won't delve too deeply into the application layer or the day-to-day administrative tasks that are often done atop of something like an IBM I deployment. But we will explore the fundamentals of working with AIX and Linux atop of IBM Power Systems Virtual Server so that you have some expertise necessary to tailor bespoke demonstrations with your clients. Before you create a Power VS Virtual Server instance, you must understand the differences between the terminology of a Power VS service and a Power VS instance. Think of a Power VS service as a container for all the Power VS instances at the specific geographic region that you've selected. Power VS instances are virtual machines or VMs. The service is available from the resource list in the IBM Cloud Portal. For example, you can have two services, one in Dallas, another in Texas. Each service can contain multiple instances. A service must be associated with an IBM Cloud resource group, which helps in grouping resources, assigning permissions, and allowing different groups or teams of users access to those resources. The key parameters for any Power VS service are the following. First is the location of your data center. As of August in 2022, Power VS is co-located with 15 different IBM Cloud data centers located across different geographies of the world. When selecting a data center, consider choosing the data center that's located nearest to the majority of the end users that will be accessing the workloads that are running in your Power VS environment. The second parameter is the service name. The Power VS service name will appear in the IBM Cloud Portal under the provision services. Specify a name that is unique to you and one that you'll easily recognize and understand the meaning of when you come across it in that resource list. Resource groups are the third parameter. They are used to organize resources in your IBM Cloud account. All administrative tasks and access rights for a Power VS resource are associated with the Power VS service, not the individual Power VS instances, which are the separate VMs like the ones you'll be running today. Once a Power VS service is assigned to a resource group, the resource group cannot be changed. IBM Power Systems virtual servers are located in the IBM data centers, distinct from the IBM cloud servers with their own separate networking and direct attached storage. The environment is in its own pod, and the internal networks are fenced off but offer connectivity options to meet customer requirements like access to the public internet. This infrastructure design enables IBM Power Virtual Server to maintain key enterprise software certification and support as part of the PowerVS architecture. The virtual servers, known as instances or logical partitions or LPARs or virtual machines, all run on IBM Power Systems hardware with the PowerVM hypervisor. The key parameters for a PowerVS instance are as follows. Instance name is the name that will appear in the IBM Cloud Portal under the list of instances within that service. Specify a name that is easily understood and recognized by you so that you can quickly pick it out from the list of instances associated with your account. Server placement group is another key parameter that provides control over the host or the server on which a new virtual machine is placed. Using server placement groups, high availability solutions can be created within a data center. Apply an affinity or anti-affinity policy to each VM instance within a server placement group. When setting a placement group with an affinity policy, all VMs in that placement group are launched on the same server. When setting a placement group with an anti-affinity policy, all VMs in that placement group are launched on different servers. You can learn more about the placement groups and what they offer in the documentation linked to this coursework. VM pinning policy controls the movement of VMs or virtual machines during disasters or other events that may lead to a restart of your VM. You can learn more about hard and soft pinning options in the coursework that is to follow. SSH keys are either a public or a private key pair, and it's required in order to access the instance over a remote connection. An SSH key must be created and loaded into the IBM Cloud Portal prior to creating your instance, and you can learn more about how to do that in the coursework that we have just ahead. Operating systems include things like AIX, IBM I, or Linux operating systems. Several Linux images are available specifically for servers that will run SAP, and we'll cover a little bit of AIX and IBM I in the steps ahead. OS images are another key parameter for our instances. Users have the ability to choose an operating system image from either the PowerVS image catalog, or they can bring their own image to the environment. Each supported OS has specific sets of images in the PowerVS catalog for supported OS versions. Each instance is provisioned with a boot volume using the storage tier selected at the time that you provision. Storage tiers, as just mentioned, are another key parameter for PowerVS environments. PowerVS supports both Tier 1 and Tier 3 storage. Tier 1 provides a maximum of 100 input and output operations per second, or IOPS, per gigabyte, while Tier 3 provides a maximum of 3 IOPS per gigabyte. For that reason, we only recommend Tier 3 storage for non-production workloads. Storage pool affinity is another key parameter that you must think through and decide ahead of time when provisioning. 3 storage pool affinity options are available for PowerVS: auto-select, affinity, and anti-affinity. If you select the affinity option, it requires that the boot volume be placed in the same pool as another existing instance or existing boot volume. The new storage volumes for the instance will be placed in the same storage pool where the affinity object resides. The anti-affinity option specifies that a different pool should be used from that or another existing instance or any other existing boot volumes. Yet another variable for you to consider are the core types that you're going to use for your PowerVS instance. PowerVS supports shared uncapped, shared capped, and dedicated cores. Shared uncapped cores are shared, as you would expect, amongst other clients. Shared capped cores are shared, but the resources do not expand beyond what is requested at the time. Dedicated cores are allocated on a specific client basis and are not shared amongst other multi-tenant users in the environment. The number of cores is, of course, also a consideration. The option for the number of cores assigned to an instance depends on the type of core type that you selected earlier. Shared capped and unshared capped cores support 0.25 or quarter core increments in terms of how you can scale and grow these, while dedicated cores must be assigned a full core at a time. Note that the maximum number of cores will also depend on the machine type and the availability in the selected region and the location where you go to deploy your PowerVS instance. The amount of memory is another consideration. Power VS instances must be provisioned with a minimum of 2 gigabytes of random access memory, or RAM. The maximum number of memory depends again on the machine type and the availability in that selected location. If greater than 64 gigabyte RAM per core is specified, a higher price will be charged as an additional surplus on top of the per core rates that they would charge for IBM Cloud. You may also want to consider additional storage volumes. When provisioning a new instance for additional storage, a new data volume can be created or an existing volume can be attached. Any storage volume added at that time will be using the same storage tier as the boot volume that was specified when you provisioned the instance. Networking is yet another consideration. Power VS instances will be attached to a private network by default, but can optionally be attached to a public one. Internet accessible networks are considered to be public. Private networks connect to an existing subnet or go to a subnet that had been previously created. In this chapter and the steps ahead, you'll view a Power Video instance being provisioned and replicate the steps taken yourself using a click-through guide demonstration. So with that, let's take a pause on the theory and the terminology and take a little bit of time for hands-on work. Via the IBM Cloud Portal, clients can control and manage many aspects of their Power VS deployment, either graphically using a web interface or programmatically using APIs. As you'll explore in this section, the programmatic API endpoints provide the same capabilities and even more capabilities from what you're able to manage via the IBM Cloud web interface. Via APIs, clients are able to perform an OS shutdown, perform an immediate shutdown without killing the processes running within it, restart the environment, reset the environment, or open a console or a terminal window, such as something like PuTTY, to the instance. You'll also be able to delete the instance, capture and export an image of that instance for backup purposes as well. Note that the API endpoint options may vary depending on the operating system of the Power VS instance that you selected at provisioning time. Of course, for this lab, we'll all be working with the same OS, but it's something to consider when deploying your own environment at a later time. In addition to exploring the ways in which you can programmatically interface with your Power VS instance, we'll also examine how to modify the instance after it's been deployed. Depending on your core type, operating system, and so on, a client can perform a number of different tasks in this way. They could change, for example, the VM pinning options from something like soft or hard options. They could change their core type from shared uncapped to shared capped to dedicated. They can change the number of cores in their system. They can change the amount of RAM available to it. They can change their placement group. And it's also possible to attach and detach storage volumes or attach an instance to an existing network should that client wish to do that. Given that the IBM Technology Zone environment used for this course is a shared service with multiple students and different geographies, safeguards had to be put in place ahead of time to ensure that the environment remains stable and consistent over time. As such, many of the modifications that you attempt in terms of adjusting the instances or the configurations of that instance will often fail on the IBM Cloud Portal, and that's completely expected and all due to the safeguards that we put in place to prevent modification to that lab environment. IBM Power Systems Virtual Server is an infrastructure as a service or IaaS offering. Power VS allows clients to rapidly provision new instances of either running AIX, IBM I, or Linux environments. Ultimately, clients will want to deploy applications on top of those machines, and the applications that a client chooses to deploy will often vary widely in terms of their end goal use cases. They may include things like middleware for databases, third-party software products like SAP, or applications that they developed in-house themselves. To install these applications, the client needs access to the instance and the ability to install the software atop of that environment. A fundamental challenge that every customer examining an expansion to cloud will face is how to connect their on-premises data sources with off-premises or cloud-based resources and services. Doing so securely, efficiently, and cost effectively will undeniably challenge most organizations of every size, whether they are a mid-sized business or an enterprise company. How do you connect to the IBM cloud is a question that we often get. And there are three routes to take in that path: via either the public internet, via a VPN tunnel, or via IBM Cloud Direct Link 2.0. In most cases, clients are going to deploy Power VS instances using a secured network like Direct Link or virtual private networking or VPNs. IBM Cloud Direct Link 2.0 provides a level of trusted connectivity from enterprise sources to a customer's IBM Cloud private network. There are offerings of IBM Cloud Direct Link 2 that are specifically tailored to every customer's workload requirements or business use cases. Direct Link Connect is a bespoke solution for data center to data center connectivity between clouds, between on-premises and cloud, or combinations thereof. And it provides flexible bandwidth requirements and multi-cloud environments as well. It also presents a lower cost of entry for IBM Cloud Network customers compared to other Direct Link offerings from IBM. Dedicated hosting options are also available for clients working with non-standard technologies requiring more bespoke networking solutions. Many such customers need to maintain and continue leveraging their existing IT investments while continuing to invest into cloud-based new technologies. Dedicated storage options are available in parallel for such customers, and the connection point for dedicated hosting is adjacent to the IBM Cloud Data Center to provide optimal latency and performance to those clients. In this chapter, Chapter 5 or Part 5 of this coursework, you'll learn how to access a running instance by using Secure Socket Shell, or SSH, via the IBM Cloud Shell Command Line Interface, or CLI. And through that, you'll take a programmatic approach to managing your Power VS instance. Mentioned earlier throughout this Level 3 course are a variety of features available for managing your Power VS instance once that infrastructure and the services have been deployed on IBM Cloud. The customizability and scalability of these environments post-launch are precisely the type of cloud-centric benefits that draw clients and customers towards an investment in Power VS. In this chapter, we'll dive deeper into each of those advanced topics to get you up to speed on the fundamentals and provide you a launching point for you to craft more bespoke demonstrations and more complex demos on these topics for your own client engagements. Specifically, in this part, you'll examine each of the four categories in turn that we've mentioned: server placement groups, storage solutions including volumes, boot volumes, and images, networking topics that include subnets, cloud connections, and VPN connections, and additional services that are available from the IBM Cloud Catalog. Server placement groups deliver high availability, or HA, options for your Power VS instance within a data center, either on the same with affinity configuration or separate anti-affinity configuration physical servers. Every instance of IBM Power VS consists of a mandatory boot volume via the IBM Cloud Object Storage buckets provided on IBM Cloud, and has the option for additional storage volumes should a client require more post-launch or at the time that they launch. Boot images can also be supplied to provision new instances, and you'll explore the variety of options available for those through the IBM Cloud Web interface. Subnets have a specific set of terminology for their types and uses that are found in our platform on IBM Cloud. Each subnet provides IP addresses to resources in different ways, and by knowing more about each type of subnet, you can understand how to best make use of them in your cloud infrastructure when it comes time to provide a scope or a set of definitions for your environment. Primary subnets are subnets assigned to meet the IP addressing needs of other products, such as bare metal servers or virtual server instances. These subnets are automatically assigned or removed at creation and destruction times. Secondary subnets are subnets which are purchased and routed by you, canceled when they're no longer needed. There are two types of secondary subnets, either portable or static. Portable IP addresses are available to all resources on a VLAN, whereas static IP addresses are available to the resource identified as their routing endpoint. Global IP addresses' unique routing behavior utilizes IBM Cloud's backbone to provide IP addresses to the resource identified as the routing endpoint. Cloud connections and VPN connections were introduced earlier in Part 5 of your learning materials, but options around how they're provisioned and how they're added to Power VS instances will be explored more deeply in the chapter ahead. IBM Power Virtual Server provides Command Line Interface, or CLI, as a plugin to the IBM Cloud CLI. The Power VS CLIs provide system administrators the ability to programmatically manage their Power VS environment without having to use the IBM Cloud Public Portal. In this chapter, you'll explore a variety of CLI instructions that can be issued via the IBM Cloud Shell portal or via any SSH connection like PuTTY or Terminal for administration of your Power VS instance. The topics include things such as inspection of all Power VS services that are provisioned under your IBM Cloud account, setting the service target of the IBM Cloud Shell to the instance ID of your Power VS environment. We'll also be setting the target of future Power VS plugin commands to an environment variable that we can reference later. Inspection of the 4 virtual machines or VMs that are provisioned as part of your Power VS environment, which includes both AIX and RHEL. We'll also be restarting a virtual machine programmatically using that CLI interface. You can also use this interface to generate an SSH private key for managing your Power VS environment through other users or teams or groups. As you'll see, there are hundreds of potential CLI instructions that can be issued to your Power VS environment, and our goal with this lab is not to be exhaustive and to go into every command in detail, but rather to provide you with a representative sampling of the jobs that can be performed programmatically via CLI. Using that foundational knowledge, you'll then be prepared to craft more tailored demonstrations and tasks with your own clients. Over the course of this L3 material and demonstration guide, you've learned how easy it is to provision resources with the IBM Power Virtual Server or Power VS environment. You also learned some of the basics from managing Power VS resources, but there is still much more to learn about Power VS. Links to specific Power VS topics are provided throughout this demonstration guide and the associated materials. And if you haven't already, we strongly recommend that you take the time to read the official Power VS documentation available online to learn the full capabilities of the offering in detail. Also, a friendly reminder to our IBM sellers and technical sellers that you need to complete a stand and deliver recording and presentation such as this one to your manager to showcase your newly learned skills in terms of how to provision, work with, and demonstrate a Power VS environment for a client. You need to work against the requirements set out in the rubric and the criteria that are attached as part of this coursework. So I strongly recommend that when you're crafting that video and that messaging, that you're building it against those requirement checklists, as that is what your manager will be using to certify your completion of the stand and deliver. And for our partners and business partners, you need to complete the certification quiz, which is that 5-question multiple choice quiz that contains information that was presented to you as part of the hands-on learning. With that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Andy Jones and myself for taking the time to go through this Level 3 material with us. We certainly hope it's been helpful and beneficial to you, and that it will be equally as valuable in your engagements with customers around Power VS. If you have any questions about the material covered here or about the offerings that were included as part of it, feel free to reach out to Andy or I at any time via email, phone, or Slack, or elsewhere. We're happy to take your questions and look forward to seeing you again in additional Level 3 and other learning that is coming from the IBM enablement team. With that, good luck in selling in the year 2022 and the years ahead.